Could've, would've, should've. That's this week on Motoring 2000.
TSN's Motoring 2000 is brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them, and Midas Car Care, the way it should be.
This week we're at the Gilles Villeneuve Circuit in Montreal, home to the Canadian Grand Prix since 1978. And soon as I said Formula One, I could already hear Bill Gardiner going, "Formula One, boring, give me NASCAR." Well, like it or not, Formula One is big and getting bigger. But speaking of NASCAR, the Big Three coined a phrase, win on Sunday and sell on Monday. Well, can the same be said about the Formula One gang, where a steering wheel can cost up to $100,000? I mean, does it really make good business sense? We'll try and find an answer to that question later on. But first, we're going to revisit with a story that got an incredible amount of response from viewers, and it's a story about a car that many believe never got the respect it deserved. Stylish and affordable is how Pontiac described the Fiero when it arrived in 1984. With a base price of about $8,000 American dollars, the Fiero was a big sales success, with over 136,000 units sold in the United States.
Are you ready? Like this Fiero. The cutest. I went on my own without my parents, and I paid for it $4,000. Okay, my father did kick in $6,000, but I am not a princess. If I were a princess, I wouldn't have paid for anything. Does anyone have any gum?
But the car was far from perfect. Mechanical problems plagued the vehicle. Sales figures were cut in half the following year, and by the end of 1988, the Fiero was out of production.
When they first brought it out, it was a bit of a Mickey Mouse thing, because they had like the front end of a Citation bolted into the back end of the Fiero, and the front end was basically Chevette suspension. However, once they stuck the V6 in it, stopped it catching fire, it was actually a real good little car.
Looking back, is it a bad dream? Was it a mistake?
No, it was never a mistake. It was a great car. The only thing was that Pontiac had to sell the vehicle initially as a commuter car to be able to get it through, because the other two-seater belonged to Corvette. They couldn't sell it as a sports car to the corporation, so they sold it as a commuter car. And eventually it evolved into the 2M6, nice little 2.8-liter V6, little screamer, new body style, new front end. And then it got its new suspension in 1988, which was unfortunately the last year for the production of the vehicle.
Do you think Pontiac gave up on it too quickly?
Yeah, the instant that they got it right was the instant that they trashed it. And if they'd have given it 6 months or maybe even one more model year, I think they would have seen sales pick up, and appreciably so.
Once embarrassed to admit they owned a Fiero, many of the close to 300,000 registered owners are now coming out of the closet, with car clubs springing up all over North America. The Fiero has also meant a dream come true for the owners of the Fiero shop, who service, custom, and drive Fieros.
Love affair with the Fiero started in '92 when I purchased my first Fiero, and I kind of had it serviced in a couple of places, and I realized that nobody really likes to work on them, or some people don't know how to work on them, so I started to do a little bit here, a little bit there, and that's how we started 3 years ago. And it helps that all of us drive one of these, at least one of these, and they have confidence in us. I suppose that's what brings them here. And there's a lot of people out there who love the cars, and whatever some people say about it, it's a great car. And as long as you don't mind driving a two-seater, it's something to own.
Well, about 8 months ago, we started to put a 3.8 supercharged engine in it out of a 94 Bonneville. And we've had it bored out, and it's been ported and polished and blueprinted and balanced, and put a 5-speed manual Muncie transmission on the thing, and the motor now is around 300, but we're in the middle of putting a NOS kit in it nitrous oxide, and that should take it up to close to 400 horsepower.
Your thoughts on this car? I mean, we're here with a gentleman who makes a living at customizing them, but what went wrong with the Fiero?
I think the problem was they never put enough horsepower in them. They had the handling and they had the looks, but they just didn't have the performance. Even with the 2.8, it was only putting out 140 horsepower. It just wasn't enough to keep the guys who like that kind of a car happy.
In 1984, when the first production year came out, their main problems was engine compartment fire. Where it occurred is in the rear firewall of the vehicle. Main wiring harness junction was in that area, so was the exhaust manifold. What occurred most times was oil would leak out of the valve cover, sit onto the manifold, splash all over the wiring harness, and the wires would start to burn. What they did to cure that problem is they covered the entire manifold with a heat shield. And that was one of the recalls they had between 84 and 85.
So everybody agrees, by 1988, the Fiero was a terrific car. The question, though, still remains, why did General Motors pull the plug?
They were so good, they posed the competition to Corvette, and at the price they were selling them, which the top price was about $25,000, it was almost half the price of a Corvette. And that's my opinion of why they stopped making them, rather than what they claimed that the sales dropped so low that they couldn't sell enough cars to warrant their production.
The Corvette guys got a little bit antsy because the car was a foot longer than the 88, 89, and it was a very aggressive looking vehicle. So that plus the fact that sales of two-seaters were down, except for the Mr. 2 from Toyota, they elected to discontinue the program at that time and not pursue it any further.
There was a lot of bad blood, I guess, when we started the shop. People said we were crazy, we will never make a living at it. You know, there's not enough Fieros out there, and I guess we proved them wrong.
I'm no stranger to adrenaline. I downhill ski, I race cars. I was even a passenger on a hang glider once. But there's one thing that terrifies me, and I'll tell you why, later on Kenzie's Corner.
This is the 2001 Mercedes-Benz SLK, a car that distinguishes itself by being a tin top and a delightful roadster. The beauty of it is, after you hit the button, 30 seconds later, you've gone from a hard top to a convertible. And you don't have to worry about where you're going to store that awful tin top, nor do you have to lift it off and hump it about.
The new look adds many of the styling cues that are becoming a Mercedes-Benz trademark. The new front and rear fascias are new, the headlights resemble something of a cross between the C-Class and S-Class lamps, and there are now turn signal repeaters in the side mirrors. All subtle moves, but moves for the better nonetheless.
You know, aside from the obvious cosmetic changes they've made to this 2001 SLK, the biggest difference, they've shoehorned a V6 under the hood. Now this thing brings two things to the party that the four-cylinder compressor motor couldn't. First of all, smoothness and refinement, but more importantly in a roadster application, it brings 229 pounds-feet of torque anywhere between 3,000 RPM and 4,600 RPM. It makes a tremendous difference and really does change the personality of this car.
The delivery of power is both smooth and linear, and the response to throttle application instant. The difference has to be experienced to be believed, as tromping the gas delivers a turn of speed that's the equal of the SLK's immediate competition. The 0 to 100 km/h dash requiring just 6.9 seconds. As is rapidly becoming a Mercedes norm, this engine sticks to a single overhead cam and only 3 valves per cylinder to produce the power. According to the powers that be, the multi-everything route is not paying the dividends it was when first introduced. In other words, it's getting expensive for the minimal improvements it adds to the engine. As I've mentioned before, de-roofing a car takes considerable forethought, as the roof is a key structural member. To attain the requisite level of structural integrity, Mercedes-Benz strengthened the floor pan and side sills,
increased the metal thickness of the central tunnel and added several cross members and stiffeners front and rear. Add to that substantially reinforced A-pillars and twin rollover bars and you have a very tight package. Indeed, the SLK is one of the few convertibles I've driven where cowl shake is all but non-existent, regardless of road condition. Consequently, the poise displayed when the car is pushed is very difficult to beat. The SLK uses double wishbones up front and a 5-link or multi-link system in back. The design and execution is first class, meaning the ride is comfortable and the handling excellent as witnessed in the pylon test. You know, while this netting does a great job of keeping the windy backwash out of the cabin at 120 kilometers an hour, it's got two drawbacks. First of all, frankly, it's not the most attractive looking piece, but worse still, it restricts the view through the rear view mirror. You know, rather than bore you with a guided tour through the SLK, there's just a couple of things worthy of note. First of all, there's an available 6-speed manual transmission. Good news. However, the better news is the fact that they've included the 5-speed manumatic from the S-Class Benz. This thing allows you to do the driving or be driven when you're in stop-and-go traffic. There's also an electronic stability control program. This thing uses the brakes and the accelerator to keep you on the straight and narrow. It works wonderfully well. The only problem is, when you go out for a serious thrash, well, even when you turn it off, it remains on to a degree which impinges on the ultimate fun. Then, of course, there's my perennial pet peeve. The cruise control lever, well, it sits too close to the turn signal, meaning you inadvertently engage the cruise far too often. Stopping power comes from a 4-wheel disc brake system that was lifted straight from the E-Class. No fade of fear here, and the standard ABS ensures the stops are straight and stable. You know, stuffing a 3.2-litre V6 under the hood has transformed the SLK into the car it always should have been from day one. But it's not so much the horsepower and torque it brings that makes this thing so special. It's the exhaust noise. How sweet it is!
Time to say goodbye to our long-term Hyundai Accent. After nearly a decade in the pits, Hyundai's sales are on the rise. No doubt the Accent can take some of the credit. This second-generation model is completely restyled and boasts a larger interior and a quieter, more comfortable ride. The Accent's 1.5-liter engine has more horsepower and improved fuel economy. Now, our test vehicle was a coupe with a 5-speed manual, but it's also offered in a 4-door GL model. The highs with the Accent: the Alpha engine is peppy and quieter than the previous model. Handling is great. The trunk is large. And you gotta love the color. Only one pet peeve: it's the stereo. It sounds good, but the tiny switches and buttons are almost impossible to use when driving. But you know, there's no doubt that the Accent will hold its own in the subcompact market, and for the price, it doesn't get much better.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns gas-charged supports. You'll find these supports holding up the hood, the trunk lid, and the hatchback on many of today's cars. They're compact, lightweight, and easy to package. That's why they're used. But they don't always work as intended. We'll show you a couple of tips on how to deal with this. Now, these gas-charged supports contain a small quantity of oil right here in the cylinder and a high-pressure charge of nitrogen to support the load. Often we find people using sticks to prop them up, but there's other things you can do as well. You often have a pair of vice grips in the car for emergencies. You can use the vice grips on that rod to support the hood in a pinch. Now, we often use another tool that the tool companies sell, or you can buy at auto parts store, this nifty little thing here that just goes on the rod, and you tighten it up until it secures the hood, trunk, or hatchback in the position you want. Now, while a prop stick, the vice grips, or this clamp will do in a pinch, I strongly suggest that you have these gas-charged supports replaced when they act up. It's a major nuisance, it's a safety issue, and enough of a problem that in many cases people will avoid making the underhood checks that they should make just because of this. I also suggest that you have it done professionally, because a lot of people underestimate the amount of weight that's being supported by those tiny little supports. That's your Midas tip of the week.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and we'd like to welcome you to BMW M Night this evening at Alexander's on Peel Street, and also welcome BMW back into the fold of Formula One. Tonight
this was the
Alexander's,
scene at this year's Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal as BMW celebrated its return to the Formula One circuit after an absence of 13 years.
I think it was time again to prove our technical competence, and the Formula One definitely is the best place to do it, so for a big manufacturer like BMW. I mean, we always was involved in the motorsport, in different areas of motorsport, but after winning the World Championship in Formula One, and then of course several years just watching Formula One, I think it was time for BMW to come back and go into Formula One and prove it once more.
Outside the news conference, BMW had its complete range of M product on display. Just another advantage of competing on the Formula One circuit.
Well, of course, I mean, at the end of the day, we are doing it to sell more cars, and every manufacturer is doing it for the same reason. Yeah, that's definitely the goal. I mean, we had a great season until now, this year, for a newcomer. But we are knowing that we're gonna need many, many more races until we really can win races.
And sell more cars.
And then we're gonna sell many more cars, yeah.
Well, you're watching Bill Gardiner, who's been a busy man of late, traveling the country, involved in something called National Car Care Week. How about it, Bill?
Well, Brad, you're right. The folks at Pennzoil Quaker State sent me to 6 different cities across the country to promote National Car Care Month. Talk about the safety and maintenance issues, the importance of keeping your car in good shape. Now, in this business, we have a saying that maintenance doesn't really cost, it pays. So it was very exciting to go across and see people all across the country. I met a guy at a radio station in Ottawa. They call him Stuntman Stu, and he's got Brad's closing line on the show down better. He does it better than Brad. I walk in the studio and he goes, "Join us next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them." I can't even do it as well as he did it. He does it better than Brad. Anyhow, I was out in Western Canada, 5 different cities out there, talked to quite a few mechanics out there who gave me some really good pointers, really good tips on cold weather problems that I rarely see here in Ontario. I was talking to a guy in northern Alberta, for example, that told me that once he switched to our synthetic lubricants, he was able to gain 4 and 5 years of extra life out of his engines in his fleet. He was blowing up engines every year, 18 months, he told me, just from the cold weather starting. Now, we're talking minus 30 and minus 40 temperatures consistently, and sometimes even lower than that. So sooner or later, with conventional motor oils, he'd blow up an engine. With the synthetics, he says he gets great engine life. So there's a perfect example of how spending a little bit more on maintenance, in other words, the extra cost of synthetics, can save you a whole lot of money down the road. Now, one of the things we were talking about, one of the products we were talking about on this tour was Rain-X. It's a product that I've used for almost 20 years now. Rain-X is really simple to apply. After you've washed your car, take some glass cleaner and clean the exterior glass of your vehicle. Then take the Rain-X and soak it into a pad on a clean rag and wipe it on to the glass surfaces in a circular motion. It'll dry to a haze after a couple of minutes. You always use a circular motion to apply it. Wait for it to dry to a haze, then reapply it, and then sprinkle a little bit of water on there and buff it off, okay? Once it's completely buffed off, it disappears completely, but what it does is it seals the micropores in the glass so that the next time you're driving in the rain, sleet, or snow, that moisture is just going to fly off the windshield. Now, we're going to go around to the side glass on this car. We've treated just half of it in the whole windshield, and we'll show you the magic that it can work. What I've done here on the side glass in this vehicle is I've just freshly treated the front portion from the masking tape forward. I've just applied the Rain-X. Now back here I haven't done the Rain-X in a number of months, and by the way, you do have to apply this product on a regular basis. You'll find it'll last a couple of months on the front windshield and sometimes 3 or 4 months on the side glass. But when I hit this with the water spray, you're going to see the dramatic difference. Now on the back portion of the window, we've got sheeting action, and when you try and look through that at night, particularly, you're going to have a lot of distortion. On the front, the water just beads and flies right off, and the wind pressure, as you're driving the vehicle, the wind pressure going over the vehicle will just drive those little droplets right off there. On the back, that sheeting action takes a little bit longer to disappear. But I'll tell you, I've used Rain-X for a long time. If you get yourself a bottle, you're going to quickly find out why they call it the invisible windshield wiper. For the small cost of the Rain-X, it gives you a lot better visibility, a big safety factor. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardiner for Motoring 2000.
When I was about 6 years old, a friend of my older brother's brought over a big Norton motorcycle to the house and parked it in the driveway. Well, I had my Hopalong Cassidy 6-shooters on, so I thought, hey, that could be topper, so I climbed on. Damn thing fell over on me. Now, it didn't hurt me, but it did teach me my first lesson in physics, and that is, in a three-dimensional world, 2 wheels just isn't enough. Way too many degrees of freedom. You know what they call motorcycles? Widowmakers. You know what they call bike riders? Organ donors. Sorry, not for me. But at a recent BMW preview in Spain, the company brought over some of their C1 motorcycles, which they say is a safe motorcycle. It's got roll hoops on either side of the bike. It's got 2 seat belts, which keep you strapped in. The theory is, if you fall over, you stay attached to the bike and you don't get hurt. In a lot of countries in Europe, you don't even need a helmet to wear to drive one of these things. So I thought, hey, I'm an open-minded guy, I'll give it a try. Now, they had laid on a route through the streets of Marbella, Spain. Me, in town, on a bike, surrounded by a bunch of crazed Spaniards on their Vespas? I don't think so. So I just stayed on the access roads around the hotel. Believe me, that was scary enough. This thing was wobbling all over the place. Apparently the extra weight in the ceiling does terrible things to the center of gravity. I didn't want to know about it. I just got the thing back to the dispatch point, parked it, walked away. Now, 2 of my colleagues weren't so lucky. They did fall over and they did hurt themselves. A safe motorcycle? Sorry, folks. That's an oxymoron. It's like military intelligence. It ain't gonna happen. Now, BMW's partway there with the C1. They do have the roll hoops, they do have the seat belts. It actually has a windshield with the wiper on it. Now, if they just put a roof on it, maybe a couple of doors, 2 extra wheels for stability, then they'd have a car. I'm Jim Kenzie.
We're back at the Gilles Villeneuve Circuit in Montreal, and you are watching a first here, as Volkswagen Beetles are sharing the same track with the Formula One gang. And we were here to cover this race, so make sure you check out your local listings as TSN presents a special edition of the new Beetle Cup. You won't want to miss it. As for us, we'll be back next week as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
TSN's Motoring 2000 has been brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them. And Midas Car Care, the way it should be.